Thank you to HammerTech and Hanson Wade for putting this together. I think, at DPR, it's very much a learning organization. So as much as we can do to share, as well as I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers and learning from them as well. So today's session is really just going to share with you the journey and primarily lessons learned and some of the methodologies that have been put into place probably within the last 6 to 8 months at DPR as we go on this journey to digitizing our processes and most importantly, analyzing our data. So digitizing processes really wasn't new to DPR. There were so many great technologies already occurring on different projects. But unfortunately, that's exactly what was happening. It was very project-centric. And in some cases, only project teams had access to that information. In fact, just the other day, a leader found out one project was collecting great things, but had no access to it. And so as we started having these processes kind of like a per project basis, we started seeing that there were a lot of variances when it came to the processes. So because of those variances and project teams going from one project to the other, we were finding that we were having low adherences to the processes. And the great thing about digitizing them was we were able to actually start seeing this low adherence. We had a lot of assumptions of things that were going on our projects. But as we started asking questions about why we had such low adoption or participation and engagement, we found out very quickly that there was a bit of confusion as to what the baseline expectation was. And so because of this, we also saw that we had a lot of gaps when it came to really being able to visualize and understand where our teams needed support and really where our processes needed some support. Some of the processes go back maybe well over a decade, and we really needed to take some time to go in there and take a look at how to kind of pump some life to them and how to make it relevant to the project teams. So in 2019, in an effort to kind of bring together a more enterprise view, DPR partnered with HammerTech just to really kind of standardize these processes, have one platform to collect all this information and to provide some really valuable reporting to leadership as well as our projects. And as excited as we were, and at the time, data analytics and just the word data was such a big deal in the industry that they created this huge BI board with tons of tabs and tons of filters. But unfortunately, we ran into a couple situations. The first is people not realizing they had access. And then once they did have access, it was a case of data overload. They had too much data. And, those building and designing the boards were like, well, look, you have filters to choose from here. It was overwhelming. And we really had to take a step back to say, we can't assume that everyone understands how to filter in BI boards and really understands how to really consume data. So at the end of the day, we found ourselves really struggling to measure improvement and really to even measure any of the opportunities for improvement. And so I actually came on board a year ago. And so we've developed this methodology that we're going to share with you today that we're currently in place with. So as we started having all these conversations, because we had some really great pockets of excellence using the platform and adhering to all of it. But then we also had so many project teams that were struggling. So we took a deep dive and really asked ourselves, what can we do? Let's really take a deep dive into each of the processes that live in HammerTech today. And what can we do to make it better? And the one reoccurring theme was beginning with the end in mind, beginning with the end users, experience, make it easy, make it simple. But at the end of the day, the effort that we're asking them to spend in all of those processes, is it going to add value? When we look at those reports, when we look at those trends, is it going to, at the end of the day, tell us what support project teams need? And more importantly, is it going to tell us who to recognize? So that's one thing that we're really leveraging now is how to recognize project teams and trade partners that are doing an amazing job every day on projects. But we want to make sure that that reporting highlights that and has simple visuals to be able to see that. So we're going to share a couple of the visuals we have today with you just to show you what we've built so far. So part of the methodology that we're currently in today is knowing our processes. So it's not really it's not really taking the approach of what we think should be happening. It's more of taking a really deep dive and asking those stakeholders, how does this process work on a project? Where does it live in the project life cycle? What struggles are you dealing with? And so we brought in operations stakeholders now, even though they're EHS processes. At the end of the day, we are asking our operations teams to do this. So we're having conversations with regional ops, with our regional leaders, superintendents, project managers, and we're asking them, hey, this has to work for you, but at the same time, we need our compliance, right? So we're really bringing in more stakeholders to really get to know the process and understand how people are using it. We also are looking at how we measure engagement, and that actually changed in the middle of last year. So we were measuring engagement really by participation, right? Who's participating in inspections, and then also, what trade partners, were submitting things, but we weren't really and we were measuring how many projects were actually using the platform. And so now we've taken a little bit more deeper dive into that, and because we know that every project is unique. And in some cases, this is a financial thing. Some cases we had multiple contracts for one project and they all listed out separately. So we had to kind of really take all the feedback we were getting and measure accordingly. We had to also design our answers so that we can answer the questions at the end of the day. The data team and I, we worked on some BI visuals, but we found that we were still getting calls and people asking us questions. So we kind of asked ourselves, maybe we didn't design something simple enough. So we want to make sure that we're designing something that's simple enough for the end users, especially for the level of end users, so that they can get their questions answered at the end of the day. And then with this continuous feedback loop, and we'll share a little bit about that. It's still a little manual process, but the only reason it is like that is because what greater way to really dig down deep and find out what the real problems are and what the real needs are than having these conversations. And it really, right now, our feedback loop is a lot of conversations, a lot of calls, a lot of experimenting, but that's really getting us to where we want to be. So knowing our processes, it's really defining, okay, where are we struggling? Why are we struggling? And asking those end users, how can we help you? Help us design this. And in fact, we're currently in a process today where our inspection process, the traditional pick an inspection type, you go through a checklist. We're really looking at streamlining what that looks like so that we don't have a lot of noise in the data. Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to answer questions. But getting 5,000 BI results on hard hats isn't really going to save somebody's life at the end of the day. So we're really asking the operations team, help us design this. This is your inspection. This is your data. Help us design something that's going to help you at the end of the day. And we're actively doing that today. And it's a lot of exciting conversations. So this is an example of a leader point of view. And this leader point of view is really to show trade partner engagement as well as our project team engagement. So we're able to measure, these are specific processes in HammerTech. We have our orientation process, which is represented by this pink, purple, magenta bar. And then we also can see the safe site safety plan submittal process, SDSs and JHAs. And so we want to make sure that we're able to kind of see like where is the engagement for trade partners who have actively mobilized. So in HammerTech, if you didn't know, there's a start date for all trade partners that are enrolled on a project. And we're using that mobilization date to say, okay, if a trade partner is actively mobilized, these are things that should be in place. And we want to know where we stand with that for projects. That way we can start asking projects if they need support. Sometimes it's a matter of a trade partner still learning, going through that learning curve of using technology. As you know, a lot of these processes were very paper driven or sometimes just a submittal on an email. And so it's really, having workshops for trade partners, communicating with them directly, supporting them in using the platform. The other piece was also getting our own teams to transition to, communicating with trades early, making sure we had time for that learning curve, and then that our teams had time to start reviewing, approving, and getting familiar with the platform ourselves. So this is just a quick view of what we've provided for leaders, just to kind of see overall, how are the projects in your business unit doing? And then that way they can start asking some specific questions and recognizing as well. So you see a lot of 90s and 89s there. That's actually really great performance. And so we want to start recognizing the teams and the trade partners for all the hard work that we're doing. The next view, so we actually broke up our reporting into two pieces. The first one is for our leaders and our more EHS professionals, higher level, that are responsible for business units and regions. We gave them a tremendous amount of data as well as filters because they have to dig in deep. As far as the projects are concerned, we built more simplified dashboards with very limited filters because we find that project team members don't necessarily have the time to filter out. So the same view here, the one before was more looking at overall project results. Here, this is an actual project point of view where I get to see from a project level, where do I stand overall with the submittal process? And then each, here down at the matrix, each trade partner's results. So I get to really see, who's missing what. So I can know exactly who to talk to, what to follow up on. And then also turn on reverse of that. If I followed up with somebody this week and then next week I can take a look in here and say, "Oop, great, they submitted everything we needed. We're good to go." Pat that trade partner in the back. So we're really able to kind of give the project team a more simplified view, and it's really geared towards managing their trade partners and their EHS processes. So when we design these new boards, and by the way, we're still designing, we're revamping them because we get comments all the time, which is amazing, by the way. I mean, I think that's a win because we have people looking at the data, asking a lot of questions. It's really just making sure everything that you're designing is intentful and specific to answer questions from the field and for leadership. As soon as they understand, like, hey, this board is here to help me, I don't have to go calling 20 people anymore to get answers. I can quickly see the results. They're loving it. Also, filters based on roles. As I mentioned before, we used to have one huge Power BI that literally everything lived in. And we found our project teams, it was just too much to consume. So now we have a very simplified version for project teams. We heard them loud and clear. We don't have time for filters. Give us what we need right away. And so we definitely designed it with their purpose and intent. And then we just make sure we're also making sure that we're celebrating the wins, that everything that we designed highlights the challenges and the areas where teams need support, but also highlights, hey, these are some really great wins. Go out there, start recognizing. And we have a lot of great examples of where leaders are now calling out project teams and giving them props in different communications that we have internally, as well as calling out individuals for all of their hard work as well. And I don't know about you, but I love getting a pat on the back for all the hard work I'm doing. So it's going a long way. As far as feedback is concerned, I talked a little bit about our process. So right now it's still very manual, but we do, I'll give you an example. Right now we're running a pilot with the new checklist that's being designed by the operations team. And so we're really soliciting feedback and asking really specific questions because we really want to know what works, what doesn't. And we're pretty candid with them to say, look, if we need to start from scratch, let us know. I mean, that's what's great about DPR. We're willing to learn. We're willing to say, time out. This isn't working. Let's try again. And we're getting the right representation. We are going to project teams and we're asking them, how do you feel about this? This is yours. So help us design this. And they are eating it up. They're saying, it's about time. They're saying, thank you. And so, but you know what? You have to also be willing to hear that what you maybe had in place before wasn't hitting the mark. And that's okay. That's a win, because now you're saying, let's partner together and let's design the future. And then also you have to be willing to shed the processes. And that's in a perfect example of where we're finding that, the project teams and leaders are saying that visual is great, but that really doesn't give me what I need. And so you have to be willing to just shed that information, to be willing to streamline your board, streamline your processes, your forms, because at the end of the day, if we're going to ask teams to spend time on this, they have to be able to have a great deliverable, a great output. That way it adds value. It drives great conversations. And at the end of the day, it's really meant to send people home safely, right? So we want to make sure it's very clear and very intentional. So if you learn nothing else today, it's really just making sure that you get to know your processes. I think if you're just starting your journey to digitizing all of your processes, this is a great opportunity to really ask the hard questions. And that's what we're doing today at DPR. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. We're asking a lot of hard questions because there are traditional ways of doing a lot of EHS processes. And now we're saying, is that the right way? Does it always have to be done that way? And some of us get uncomfortable when we have those conversations. But at the end of the day, I think that's what makes an organization great, when you're willing to be innovative and expand outside the norm. Keep everything simple as far as your measuring engagement. A lot of people, they want to do well, they want to participate, but a lot of times we don't necessarily explain the how. How can someone participate and how can they get the credit and those pats on the back? And then we want to make sure we're designing everything with ease of use so that they do get those answers. And then of course that feedback. So beginning with the end in mind, again, don't be afraid to dive in and ask those hard questions. Don't be afraid to spend the time, because it does take time. At DPR, one of the things I learned really quickly when I started is to take a breath, because we have a lot of stakeholders, we have a lot of ideas, and we have a lot of passionate people. And all of that combined can lead to greatness. We just have to take the time to listen. We have to take the time to test and pilot and beta things. But at the end of the day, it's going to be well worth it, because it's in our journey to being an incident-free environment. We want to make sure that people go home safe. And we want to make sure that teams and leaders know exactly what they need to do, and that we provide a platform that makes it easy to use. So at the end of the day, we're able to measure our success. All right, so I just want to say thank you to HammerTech for putting this together. I look forward to hearing the other speakers. And if anyone has any questions, my information is here. That's my email. Feel free to reach out. I love sharing and I love learning. So I can't wait to hear from some of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. So we'd love to dig in a little bit further into some of the areas that you've covered. And everyone, please send through your questions. I'm sure there's plenty to cover here. So what I would love to know is to break down, as you're digitizing and you've gone through the process of refining so many processes now, you're trying to take it, initially you tried to do like a lot of them. And then I know your process was saying we need to slow down and try and go like one by one process. So if that's an example, or could you share other examples of the lessons learned that you have taken away from digitizing processes?
Yeah, so again, I've been here a year at DPR, and this journey actually started in 2019. And from my perspective, I think there were a lot of assumptions as to what processes were already in place at projects and what project teams were willing to do when it came to digitized versions of these processes. So, we pretty much at the end of the day, we collect safety plans. Of course we do. Of course we collect JHAs, but now it's really different because it's in a platform. And so there were a lot of questions, and there still tends to be a lot of questions from the project teams of like, well, I used to do this. What about this now? Because now it lives in a platform. So that's why we've decided to take the approach to just tackle one process at a time. So we're starting with the inspection process, because as you know, that's a great leading indicator in preventing incidents. So we're focusing on our incidents. And we've kind of broken it down into different steps that we're just, after this deep dive, we're going to go to the next one and really ask those hard questions. And so it's almost like we want to make sure that we can define the baseline expectation, but also find opportunities to simplify that process. You don't want to just match it up from paper to digital. Is there a way? Always ask yourself, is there a way to simplify this? And we're finding through these conversations, there are opportunities. And by the way, for those of you that are customers or potential customers, HammerTech has amazing functionality that we hadn't leveraged yet. And we wouldn't have really dug in deep had we not done these deep dives.
Fantastic. So we've got a couple of questions coming through. So what are the most valuable metrics that HammerTech provides you?
So the valuable metrics that we get, and I've actually consulted several contractors in my career and worked for one in my past life, is that insight into the pre-mobilization process. So the insights into that worker orientation, the safety submittal process, that essentially sets the tone for their project. So if you can't get your trade partners to do the basic, what we would call traditional pre-mobilization, that's telling you the level of planning and preparedness that your trade partners are coming on site with. It's also telling you how much effort your project teams are putting into the planning as when a trade partner mobilizes. So I think that is such a very telling gauge. That's a very big gauge for me, big red flag. If we have low numbers in those pre-mobilization processes, we can almost expect everything else is going to be a struggle, because that sets the tone. That's the beginning of the project. How prepared are you? And DPR project teams, how diligent are you in requesting this information to ensure everything's set to plan? So to me, that's a really awesome insight that most contractors don't have today, because they haven't digitized those processes. I have a lot of colleagues in the construction industry that are saying, wow, you're able to measure that? That's awesome. They're doing it on spreadsheets on projects, but they can't see it business unit wide, region wide, organizational.
Mm. And so I guess the flow on is like, once you have that information or you've decided which metrics are most important to you, do you set benchmarks for engagement? And, is it too early to do that? So if we just start with, do you set benchmarks for engagement, and what does that look like?
So I think right now it's still too early. We have some business units that their engagement, they're in the 80s, 90s. They've got a pretty well-oiled machine, and a few, when we have new trade partners getting them on board. But we can't say that for all of DPR. It's a very large organization, and we have a lot of business units, a lot of stakeholders throughout the U.S. So we're not necessarily in the phase today where we can confidently say this is our baseline. Well, we're gonna start setting like a goal, and then whoever's above this or below, because we still have business units that are going through the adoption and having trade partner workshops, etc. Great question.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And we've got one from Scott Goodwin, which says, are you using a homegrown program or software on the street? And so I'd love the chance to broaden that and say, what tools are you using? This is not just about HammerTech. So are you using other tools to be able to digitize your safety and field processes, and what are they?
Yeah, so right now our only enterprise tool when it comes to safety processes, enterprise tool, meaning all of DPR adoption, is HammerTech today. We do have metrics on the BI board that do pertain to safety that come from our pre-qualification process. So that's out of our CMIC. So we do pull in metrics from our pre-qual process in there, those safety metrics. And then we are currently piloting a few other platforms for different processes like pre-task plans and even capturing data passively, like cameras on sites. But we have not, we haven't done anything enterprise yet, because it's still unproven. It's still in pilot phase. We're trying to understand, because this is what we feel. What we have in HammerTech is our fundamentals. That's our basic data. That's basic safety. So everything else, like all the IoT, all of the wearables, all of the new technologies coming out, that's just going to add more color and more detail to our data. So we want to make sure our teams understand how to consume what we have today, that way, as we start bringing in all this other cool technology, which I think is amazing, they're going to be able to, it's going to tell a better story. It's going to make more sense.
Well, Grace, that's the top of the session time. And I really want to say thank you so much for the time that you put into sharing the DPR construction process, to beginning with the end in mind. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Your hard work is now done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.